comment on the major milestones in the evolution of the journal and maybe for the larger field of Chinese linguistics?
Well, I felt that Professor Zhao Yuanren was a very strong formative influence on Chinese linguistics. And so when we published the very first issue, I was very proud of it and took a copy of the first issue in person to his residence up the hill and presented it to him. And right on the first page it says it's dedicated to him. And he was very happy about that.
So tell us, what was it like when you were both colleagues at Berkeley?
Oh, I have just an infinite amount of admiration for him. He's a very inward person, never says very much, but whenever he opens his mouth, it's usually something very worthwhile. Mrs. Zhao, on the other hand, was a very colorful lady who has quite a history of her own. And I remember that she would point her finger at her husband and says, "Look, you've written so many papers, so many books, and yet you don't have half of the readership that I have with one cookbook," which is how to cook and eat in Chinese. And they live up the hill in the Berkeley Hills. And once I was at their house when I first got to know them. And I went upstairs of their 3-story house to go to the washroom. And I didn't know where the lights were, so I went in to wash my hands in a dark washroom, and then I heard somebody splashing in the bathtub. And that got me really worried. I looked for the lights, found the lights, turned on the lights, and in the bathtub there were 3 or 4 big fish swimming, splashing in there. So Mrs. Zhao was fond of cooking, and whenever she had some unexpected guests, she would go up to the bathtub and pull out a fish and have a fresh fish. And Mr. Zhao, of course, spent a lot of time playing the piano. So it's a musical household, and clear evidence of this influence is their daughter Iris, Dian Rulan, who is one of the leading experts on merging Western music with Chinese music. And I just understand from what you just told me, Iris has donated a lot of her musical facilities to
In fact,
Chinese.
she just donated her entire collection of books and music and musical instruments and notes, materials. We're very grateful to her. I mean, the whole entire Chinese University community. Very grateful.
Must be an amazing donation.
And part of her heritage, because her father,
Yes.
Professor Zhao Yuanren, was known as musician, as well as many other things like
Right.
mathematician, linguist.
Right.
And you share this broad range of interests too.
I think I was influenced by his approach to scholarship. He got his degree in mathematical physics from Harvard, and went on to do lots of things in language and music. And one of the songs that I think most beloved songs in the middle 20th century in China is 叫我如何不想他. And when language asked me to write a eulogy of Professor Zhang, I could think of no better way of ending the eulogy than to put in the song with its music as at the end of the eulogy in language.
Yes.
Language told me, they don't publish music. But the editor was a good friend of mine, Bill Bright. And I said, for Professor Zhang, make an exception. And he did. They published a line of music in full musical staff at the end of the eulogy. I think that language is really interdisciplinary par excellence. Professor Zhao is a very good example. But ultimately, I think the whole goal of scholarship is to find out who we are, what is a human being, and the most distinguishing feature of a human being is human language. And if you look at it from one window, you see some of it. You look at it from another window, you see some other parts. It's like the blind man and the elephant. Okay? So only if we look through it through many, many different windows can we have a better idea, a deeper idea of what language is, and through that understand human nature more deeply.
So this is one of the motivating forces that drives your work. And, so what are the major discoveries and the achievements as far as the origin of language is concerned? And what's the relationship between Chinese linguistics and the more general quest for the origin of language?
Well, the early training that I had in linguistics, especially when I was a graduate student at the University of Michigan, it was an offshoot of European neo-grammarian view of what languages are, and also very much influenced by Saussure about linguistic systems. At around that time, I was also quite impressed by Darwin's achievements and evolution theory. And as I look at language through an evolutionary perspective, I see that there's so much variation, so much flux, and so I experimented with the idea that whereas the neo-grammarians told us that sound change has no exception, whereas the great Leonard Bloomfield said phonemes change, I experimented with the idea that maybe it's words that change, and once words which share a phoneme regroup, then it will look like the phoneme changed. And this idea that I worked out with many colleagues we call lexical diffusion. And since then, I think I broadened my perspective on that to think it's not just sound change, but morphological change, syntactic change. Any change in language is actuated by changes in words. And I think this is probably still a minority view, but nonetheless, it's worth looking at from that perspective.